Brian Laundrie is dead. The search for Brian Laundrie.
Brian Laundrie is over.
Brian Laundrie is dead.
Authorities began a massive manhunt for Laundrie after his fiancée, Gabby Petito, went missing.
The investigation went from a missing persons case to a homicide.
We got a call about a male hitting a female.
Be honest. Please.
We find the cause and manner to be death by strangulation, homicide.
Law enforcement has shared with us the Laundrie family is not cooperating.
Now, obviously, the family's under a veil of suspicion because of their lack of cooperation from the beginning.
And Laundrie's parents have changed their story about when they last saw Brian.
My son had unexpectedly come home from a trip without his fiancée, refused to speak to police. She's reported missing, and he walks out my door and doesn't come home. I do not forget that date.
And now search crews are focusing their attention on this nature reserve.
I'm just still thinking about Gabby, not even Brian.
ATVs, UTVs, we have multiple drone operators that have been sent out in numerous teams.
The parents walked into the park, they went about a mile or so, and that's where they found the items and the remains. What is so difficult to understand about that?
Chris and Roberta knew that their son Brian was grieving. They knew he was so upset.
Anyone who is grieving is sad over death.
It just doesn't look right that the parents haven't wanted to cooperate, that Brian didn't want to cooperate, that they wouldn't want to talk to the other family. So you can understand why people would be suspicious about their actions.
Did Brian kill Gabby?
You know, it's a tough question to answer, other than no.
Hey humans, so just like the first doc I did on this case, as you can imagine, this will be different than my usual docs given how sensitive and new this case is, but so many of you requested that I do a follow-up to my first one given all the new information that has come out, including the cause of death for the beautiful young woman Gabby Petito and what happened to Brian Laundrie. Now, if you aren't too familiar with this case, I know it can get kind of confusing and there still is a ton of misinformation, unfortunately. I recommend if you're unclear to first watch my first doc, which is the complete timeline of events, which will hopefully clarify any questions that you might have. I spent a long time researching every possible piece of credible information and fact-checking and put together a complete timeline, as I had not seen any news sources doing that, which really helped clarify this whole picture for me. So I will have that linked in the description. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't have plans to do a second doc, but as most, if not all of you know, Brian Laundrie's remains were just recently discovered, and there's been a lot of ongoing suspicious activity around his parents in particular, and I've done a lot of research on them, so I wanted to just make this follow-up to more complete the ongoing timeline and address some of those theories and questions around the Laundries at this point, as well as some additional information about domestic abuse, which I will abbreviate here as DV, and how we can better learn and protect ourselves, as I know we have a large survivor community here, which I hold very dear to my heart. And again, my goal is not to add to the misinformed noise, but to hopefully help provide some additional clarity as best as I can. Though I will say for this one, I will be giving my personal thoughts on certain points, which of course are just speculation, as we simply don't have all of the pieces here and may never really know the whole truth of what actually happened. And of course, most importantly, if you do have any information regarding this case, please contact the FBI tip line immediately. Now, as I do with all SWOOP docs, I will break this down into 3 parts: the updated full timeline of events with a focus on Brian and his parents, the discovery of Brian Laundrie's remains, and the theories and accusations around Brian's parents. Hopefully this will again clarify where things are at this point, remembering that this is still an ongoing investigation and things are updating rapidly. And again, I just want to extend my deepest sympathies and condolences to the Petito family. At the end of the day, they lost their child, and Gabby seemed like just such a lovely soul, and just like so many families who've lost someone, many of whom never get any answers, my heart just breaks for them, and I hope that in time, Gabby's memory will be a blessing through the pain. And in the same breath, although I do have many reservations about the Laundries' potential involvement and how they have acted, which I will of course get into and analyze. They also lost a child. You know, we have to be real about that. This entire situation is horrific and no one deserves to feel that pain. This is a situation where absolutely no one wins. There's just no good outcome here. I know some people online have celebrated Brian's death, but that's not the energy that we're going to be bringing here. This is terrible no matter how you look at it, and I want to be mindful of that. I also want to mention again, the Petito family have started the Gabby Petito Foundation in her honor, and I'm going to read part of their mission statement. The mission of the foundation is to address the needs of organizations that support locating missing persons and to provide aid to organizations that assist victims of domestic violence situations through education, awareness, and prevention strategies. It is our hope that Gabby's foundation will bring these important issues into the forefront of the public eye, and I just think that's a beautiful mission, and as I did with the last doc, I will again be making a donation from today's sponsorships to the foundation. As you all know, your support in watching these docs and checking out the sponsors is the reason I'm able to keep making these in the first place and to continue to advocate for victims. So I will never be able to say thank you all enough, like honestly. So with that, real quick, and then I'll get into the timeline and theories, I want to give a huge thank you to HelloFresh and Surfshark VPN for sponsoring today. And they're brands that I've used a long time, and I think you will really love them. HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit that delivers delicious, easy to follow recipes and fresh pre-measured ingredients ready to cook right to your front door. I am a huge fan of HelloFresh because your girl kinda sucked at cooking before. Like, I'm the one who literally burns water. And also, I didn't like all the time spent at the grocery store, but when I started cooking, I got in a rut, like cooking the same 3 things. Like, does anybody relate? Which is why HelloFresh is a game changer. It is the perfect solution to getting new, delicious, healthy meals in my belly in like 30 minutes or even 20 minutes with their quick and easy options. And this is all without having to grocery shop, plan, or meal prep, which saves me so much time. And when I say the food is delicious, honey, I made a red hot spice chicken with scallion mashed potatoes one night and like pork bulgogi bowls the next. Child, it was so good. I felt so fancy. There are tons of recipes to choose from each week, including low carb, carb smart, vegetarian, and pescatarian options, and it's super flexible. You can add extra dinners or lunches to your weekly order, easily change your delivery days or food preferences, or skip a week whenever you want. You're not locked into anything. And because you get large pre-portioned ingredients, there is way less food wasted and the packaging is almost entirely recyclable. So if you want the joy of skipping the grocery store and shopping and meal prep and have delicious meals delivered to your door, go to HelloFresh.com and use code SWOOP14 for up to 14 free meals across your first 5 HelloFresh boxes plus free shipping. That's actually a really great deal. So that's HelloFresh.com and code SWOOP14 to get 14 free meals plus free shipping. Thank me later. And big thank you to our second sponsor, Surfshark VPN, which if you don't know, I am about to blow your streaming world wide open, honey. Surfshark VPN is hands down the greatest secret to unlocking 15 of the largest Netflix, Hulu, Prime, and streaming content libraries in the world, giving you access to way more movies and shows than ever with one tap. Basically, when you do anything online, all your activity is tracked through your IP address, which is attached to the country you live in, and all streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, Prime, even YouTube, all have limits on what you're able to watch based on your location. But when I turn on Surfshark VPN, it takes my IP address and changes it to whatever country I want to instantly unlock tons more movies and shows that weren't available before. Like low-key, South Korea's Netflix literally has twice as many Oscar-winning films that I can now watch from anywhere. And it also works on Spotify, so no more blocked music. Surfshark also encrypts 100% of your data, keeping your passwords, photos, and browsing safe. I absolutely do not use the internet without my VPN turned on, and Surfshark is the only VPN that lets you run it on an unlimited number of devices with one single account. So click my link in the description to check out Surfshark and use code SWOOP to get a huge 83% off discount plus 3 months free. That's 3 months of watching a zillion new shows for free. And also, Surfshark offers a 30-day money-back guarantee if you get an account, so there's no risk to try it, and if you don't like it, you can cancel it at any time. But honestly, you're gonna love it, I promise. Okay, back to the show. And again, y'all, just thank you so much for your support and for checking out the sponsors. And I also want to start covering cases for those who haven't had the massive media coverage that this case has had, as we continue to see just how powerful social media has been here and can be for others. I'm trying to figure out like how to best work this into like the regular docs that I make, but I would love to continue to cover some more cases and true crime in addition to the influencer docs. So like let me know if you would like to see more of this, and hopefully we can do some good for other hurting families. Okay, so I'm gonna break down this new timeline, but first want to catch a few things up from the last doc. Now, we all know that sadly, sweet Gabbie's remains were found on September 19th on the eastern border of the Grand Teton National Park, and on Tuesday, September 21st, the autopsy ruled her death was a homicide.
Earlier today, human remains were discovered, consistent with the description of Gabby Petito.
Okay, so Gabbie's death was ruled a homicide, but it wasn't until several weeks later, and I'm skipping ahead here, but on Tuesday, October 12th, the Teton County coroner held a press conference announcing the cause of death, which was by strangulation.
In the manner of death of Gabrielle Lenora Petito, we find the cause and manner to be death by strangulation, and manner is homicide.
Just to take a moment here, first of all, I can't imagine in the slightest what this finding was like for her family. And I know what it's like to lose a friend killed by another person. I know people are supposed to be declared innocent until proven guilty, but I personally fully believe, based on the research and what we've seen, that Brian is the one who killed her, allegedly. I need to say that. Now, of course, we don't know if it was planned or a crime of passion or what happened, and of course, there's always the small, tiny possibility that it wasn't him. We have to leave that open, but that's how I personally feel. And if that's true, if Brian did kill her, I can't comprehend the idea of how afraid she may have been in her final moments to have her life literally taken by her fiance, the one who promised to love her more than anyone, is just, I don't know, it's just heartbreaking, for lack of a better word. And if it was Brian, violence of this nature from a male partner against a woman happens far, far too often globally, and in my eyes is an epidemic of sorts. Just to give you a few quick sobering statistics around violence against women, every day 137 women worldwide are killed by their current or former partner or a family member. Women also account for 82% of victims killed by their partner or ex-partner. And these are just the reported cases that we know about, and of those, 87,000 women and girls were murdered around the world in 2017 alone, with a massive 82% of them, that's 50,000 women and girls, were killed by a partner or ex-partner. You know, just for a moment, I can't stop thinking about when Gabbie and Brian were pulled over by police, and the body cam footage where Gabbie, who was so scared and distraught and crying almost the entire time, when she was asked by the officer if Brian had hit or hurt her in any way, and she referenced that she had a mark on her face and that Brian had grabbed her face.
He like grabs my face, like this.
I just want to say this real quick and then I'll get back to the timeline, because I think it's important to know, in case you or someone you know is currently experiencing DV, violent actions directed at or around a person's face, like whether grabbing the face or shoving at the face or even something like punching like directly beside the face, you know, like at a wall or something, can be a signal of escalating violence that could potentially result in strangulation in the future. And strangulation is the leading indicator that an abuser is attempting or willing to kill now or in the future. In an article for the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention, the study found that 43% of women who were murdered in DA and 45% of the victims of attempted murder had been strangled by their partner within the year before. And as the National Domestic Violence Hotline points out, strangulation is a significant predictor for future lethal violence. If your partner has strangled you in the past, your risk of being killed by them is 10 times higher. Strangulation is one of the most lethal forms of DV. Unconsciousness may occur within seconds and death within minutes. Again, it's not a guarantee that things will escalate. Please don't panic. This is not intended to scare any of you, but just to inform you of potential risks, because sadly, it isn't talked about nearly enough. And I just want everyone to be mindful and to also understand that just because someone doesn't die doesn't mean it's not as serious of a threat. This type of assault can have serious, permanent, or even fatal damage to the victim's throat or brain. Data on strangulation reveals a glaring picture of the severity of this type of assault. 1 in 4 women will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. 1 in 4. I just want to repeat that. 1 in 4. And of those, up to 68% will suffer near fatal strangulation at the hands of their partner. Now, I'm just gonna share this really quick. I was strangled by my abuser, and I'm not gonna go into detail because this isn't about me, and I was lucky because someone witnessed it and pulled him off of me in time, and I called the police. But I share this, which I've never shared before, because I want to try to reach someone, like literally anyone, and try to take some of the fear away. I know that survivors, often women who have been strangled, are either too scared to tell anyone or don't think it's serious because they didn't die. And please just know, first of all, that strangulation is a power move, that it is intended to paralyze you with fear. And it's also common for the abuser to excuse it away and gaslight you by saying things like, you know, I was just trying to calm you down, or you were being hysterical or irrational, which is what made Gabby's words about Brian grabbing her face and locking out of her van, out of her home, even more disturbing to me.
Why wouldn't he let you in the car? Because of your OCD?
Told me I needed to calm down. Yeah. But I'm perfectly calm. I'm calm all the time.
But she just gets worked up sometimes, and I try and really distance myself from her. So like I locked the car and I walked away from her. So I could walk away. I said, let's just take a breather and let's not, go anywhere. Let's just calm down for a minute because she's getting worked up.
Again, these are power moves with the sole purpose of controlling the victim. The perpetrator strangles as a form of power and control over their intimate partner by controlling their breathing. This pressure can lead to a loss of consciousness within 5 to 10 seconds and cause death within a few minutes. Because such a thin line exists between unconsciousness and death, strangulation sits just before homicide on the continuum of DV risk assessment. Since 2017, 4 women a day have been killed by an intimate partner. Strangulation is often one of the last abusive acts a batterer commits before he kills. Surviving strangulation is surviving attempted murder. And just so there's a bit more understanding, there are a whole list of potential symptoms of strangulation, which you can see here. But just because a person doesn't show symptoms doesn't mean it didn't happen, and doesn't mean it should be taken less seriously. It's possible to experience strangulation and show no symptoms at first, but die weeks later because of brain damage due to lack of oxygen and other internal injuries. For this reason, and for a safe way to document the abuse, we strongly recommend you consider seeing a doctor if your partner has strangled or choked you. If you are in a situation where someone is abusing you and they put their hands on your face or your throat, if they strangle you or even just feel like they might, please, if this is happening to you, please consider talking to someone you trust and ask for help. And if you don't feel like you have someone you trust, please reach out to one of the many online resources for help, or go to a doctor. That's a good way of keeping it under the radar of your abuser. And with hotlines, you can remain anonymous. They are very discreet. You can speak in code if you need to, but please talk to someone, and please also clear your search and your browser history online and on your phone if you feel that you are being monitored by your abuser. You do not have to endure this abuse. You do not deserve it, and there are people waiting to help you right now. I'm sorry, I know that was a lengthier sidebar than I originally thought, but I think it's really important, and now I will get back into the timeline and we will continue on with this case. Now, the coroner's presser was held around 11:34 a.m. and by 12:15 p.m., Steve Bertolino, the Laundrie family attorney, issued a statement via text that acknowledges Gabbie but doubles down on the fraud charges and that Brian is only considered a person of interest.
Calling her daughter's death a tragedy and restating fiancé Brian Laundrie's status as only a person of interest in the case.
So the Laundrie family attorney issues a statement and Gabbie's mom, Nicole Schmidt, responded concisely saying, "His words are garbage, keep talking."
Gabby Petito's mother firing back, Nicole Schmidt texting, quote, "His words are garbage," to a WFLA reporter in response to the Laundrie family attorney.
I know that defense attorney's job is to stick to defending their clients and doing damage control, but bitch, like honestly, time and place, right? Time and place. Like here, like he literally could have just commented on the tragedy and sent his condolences to the Petito family and then left it at that. But, you know, what do I know? Moving on. So the manhunt for Brian continued, though he was still not named an official suspect, and on the morning of October 20th, buckle up because this is confounding, but on that morning, seemingly out of nowhere, Brian Laundrie's parents decide that they finally want to go help search for Brian in the Carlton Reserve after having not helped search for their son the entire month that Brian was missing. And of course, everyone's wondering why. Like, why now? Why are you going to help now?
Why did the parents choose today to go to the preserve?
Well, it is my understanding that the preserve was only open to the public as of yesterday. So my clients reached out to me and informed me that they wanted to go into the preserve this morning, and I thought it would be wise to notify law enforcement of their intentions. I did so by text to my contact in the Northport Police Department, and they responded with thank you for the heads up, and then they met my clients there this morning.
I want to point out that their attorney said that he wanted to notify law enforcement that the family was going to go search, not the family.
And I thought it would be wise to notify law enforcement of their intentions. I did so by text.
Perhaps the parents weren't even going to notify anyone and just go, like we don't know. But the attorney suggesting it and not them seems odd to me. And secondly, saying that they went to look simply because the park was closed before and just opened.
Well, it is my understanding that the preserve was only open to the public as of yesterday.
Honestly, like it's bullshit to me. Sorry, like swoop speculation incoming, all right, warning, warning. But the reserve was open until September 21st before they closed for the month. So if the park being closed was a factor and Brian was reported missing the 17th, why was his family not out searching for him on the 17th, the 18th, the 19th, or the 20th? Like, I mean, like what parent wouldn't insist on spending every waking moment looking for their missing child? Like that's what Gabbie's parents did. Why didn't the Laundries? And you know, I'm willing to bet that they could have gotten permission to go search the reserve anytime they wanted with police who was asking for them to help. So why did they refuse to go search before? Like, what changed? Like, none of this makes any sense. Or does it? I'll get into my thoughts on that in a little bit.
We do have some breaking news right now in Northport. The FBI has confirmed that Brian Laundrie is dead and the human remains found in the woods yesterday are his.
So Brian's parents joined the search, and in an interview with Chris Cuomo on CNN, the Laundrie attorney described the search.
Chris and Roberta walked into the preserve. It is my understanding that they were followed closely by the two law enforcement personnel. And when I say closely, certainly within eyes shot. And as they went further in, Chris ventured off the trail into the woods. He was zigzagging in different areas. Law enforcement was doing the same thing. And Roberta Laundrie was walking down the trail. And I believe that is on some video for some other news outlet. At some point, Chris locates what's called a dry bag. The dry bag is a white bag, is laying in the woods, I'll say 20 feet or so off the trail. According to Chris, it was in some bramble.
So Bertolino said, according to Chris Laundrie, he didn't want to pick up the bag because he wanted law enforcement to see it. However, he couldn't find the law enforcement because they were then out of sight, and so he didn't want to leave the bag there with a news reporter standing there, so he picked it up? Wait, bitch, wait, okay, so I thought that you just said he was within eyeshot of law enforcement.
It is my understanding that they were followed closely by the two law enforcement personnel. And when I say closely, certainly within eyeshot.
So like, honestly, what in the Lil Nas X gave you the idea that picking up a piece of evidence without law enforcement would be a good idea? Like, now you're potentially with chain of command, and you know your fingerprints are now going to be on that bag. Or I don't know, is that what you wanted because you placed it there? Like, and if so, when did you place it there? Like, you see how this easily opens it all up to extreme skepticism about the parents' potential involvement and if they could have planted the evidence and how convenient that would be. Like, people could literally speculate that perhaps it was planted the 13th, 14th, or 15th of September when the Laundries were out at the very scene alone before they ever told law enforcement that Brian was even missing. So here's video of him picking up the bag. Well, not actually picking it up, as their attorney says that video exists. I haven't been able to find it, but a little before, and then him with the bag, and he's with Roberta, not law enforcement. So my other question is, like, couldn't he have yelled at Roberta to go get someone instead of picking up this bag? Couldn't he have asked that independent reporter to go get law enforcement? Or like, shit, like, if you see evidence, law enforcement's not around, don't touch it, and like, just wait for someone to come around. Scream your head off. You probably had a phone, call somebody, but like, don't touch it, you know?
He did meet up shortly with law enforcement. They looked at the contents of the bag. At that time, law enforcement officers showed him a picture on the phone of a backpack that law enforcement had located also nearby and also some distance off the trail. At that point, the Laundries were notified that there was also remains near the backpack, and they were asked to leave the preserve.
Brian's parents find his stuff within a 30 to 45 minute walk, while police and FBI and all their millions of dollars of equipment and their 38-day massive search found nothing. Got it. Noted. Laundries walk into the park and straight to where Brian is. I mean, honestly, you can't make this shit up at this point.
Let's talk about the reserve. A lot of people can't wrap their minds around the fact that the reserve had been searched week after week, and then less than 24 hours, the parents went out there. What did they share with you about their reasoning for going out there and why they knew specifically where to go?
They started at the beginning of the preserve. It just so happened that that's where Brian was. So my thought would be, anybody who's questioning that, it's not too bright. What the public doesn't understand, I don't understand. The parents walked into the park from the entrance to the park or the trailhead. They went about a mile or so, and that's where they found the items and the remains. What is so difficult to understand about that?
I don't understand how they don't understand. Oh my gosh, everyone is so dim. How could we possibly think this sounds odd? It's just such a coincidence. Duh.
Well, I think it's hard to grapple with the fact that the reserve had been searched so extensively by FBI professionals over the last 4 or 5 weeks, and they hadn't come across anything. And then all of a sudden, we have several items and human remains. I think that's what people aren't fully understanding, the timing of that.
So once again, I don't understand what the public doesn't understand.
Listen, bitch, listen. Okay, I'm getting a little heated, a little petty, just a quick moment, but I'm pretty sure that pissing off and insulting like the whole general public,
this is just silly. So if I'm the only one who has to say that this is hogwash because I didn't want to say the word bullshit, then I'm gonna say it. It's bullshit. And I'm sorry if John Q. Public doesn't get that.
Excuse me, John Q. Public, might not be the brightest idea given the almost certain impending civil suit coming your way. But I will say there are a lot of eyes waiting to see what is contained inside, not just the backpack and the dry bag, but the notebook that was found. Now, they did say that it was quite wet, but forensics believes that they can salvage a good part of it, and like, hopefully that's true. And honestly, because everything else is just such a mystery, like, I'm thinking like, hopefully Brian Brian wrote something in there that gives an indication of what happened. Like perhaps there's a confession note in it, or perhaps it's a goodbye letter, or perhaps it's nothing. But I hope that some more clarity can come from the evidence found that gives at least Gabby's family a little more peace in a very horrible situation. So the next day they confirmed that the remains were in fact Brian's, and they had to use dental records to identify him because the remains were only skeletal.
Put out a tweet the FBI did from Denver, their Denver office, saying a comparison of dental records confirmed that the human remains found at the reserve are those of Brian Laundrie. Meanwhile, the search for additional remains continues here at the reserve.
Now, let's talk about those skeletal remains for a second. Even if the body was underwater, the experts say that he wouldn't have been underwater long enough for this to occur by water or decomposition, for it to become skeletal.
The FBI had not been able to search the area where the remains were found until now because it had been underwater.
Today when I walked back there, I got to see firsthand the treacherous conditions that they were working on.
Tom Joyce, a retired NYPD commander, said, and this is sensitive information, so just a warning, if the remains are skeletal, that means the tissue has been pulled away from the bones, most likely by alligators, crabs, fish, and stuff like that. This is what it sounds like to me, because it's definitely not long enough time for it to go naturally. So honestly, this has to be said, however this went down, it is a terrible story in what has become a horrible, horrible tragedy. And I know we all have our assumptions and thoughts about Brian and the Laundries, but this was another life aside from Gabby's that has ended, and another set of parents who lost a child, which is tragic no matter what happened. And like, nobody asked for any of this to happen. Now, after this discovery, they take the bones to do an autopsy, and when it's completed a couple of days later on October 23rd, they come up with basically no answers, like no cause of death, no estimate of how long he's been gone, like literally nothing, which is frustrating, of course, and terrible for the families involved. And in a statement made by the Laundrie's attorney via text, he said, no manner or cause of death was determined, and Brian Laundrie's remains were sent to an anthropologist for further evaluation after autopsy results came back inconclusive. Maybe we'll learn something from the anthropologist in the future, maybe not. But as of now, we're left with like no real answers here, which is just so sad. And I think especially for the Petito family on top of the tragic loss. Okay, now I want to shift gears and bring this back to the timeline that specifically involves Brian Laundrie's parents and alarming statements made by their attorney the last few days, as there are a lot of concerns surrounding the Laundrie's behavior around all of this, and like their refusal to search for Brian or cooperate with law enforcement, and their potential lies about a couple very crucial dates. So just a forewarning, in this segment I'm going to address some of the skepticism and conspiracy theories as I move sort of backwards in the timeline now, and I'm not going to give a lot more of my own personal thoughts on this, which of course are purely speculation based on my research, as we simply don't know what happened, which you may or may not agree with, and I would love to hear your thoughts about all of this in the comments. So in an interview with the Laundrie attorney on October 21st, the day Brian's remains were confirmed, their attorney, Bertolino, says something very concerning. He says that shortly before Brian left for the hike on September 13th, that Brian was grieving.
Chris and Roberta knew that their son Brian was grieving. They knew he was so upset, and they just couldn't control that he was leaving, and he left. He walked out the door, and Chris has said to me, I wish I could have stopped him, but I couldn't.
They knew he was grieving, bitch, and knew he was so upset. Like, listen, okay, listen, I don't know about you, but people typically only use the word grieving when someone has died, like they've experienced loss. Grief is the response to loss, particularly to the loss of someone or some living thing that has died, to which a bond or affection was formed. So Steve, Mr. Bertolino, Steve, can I call you Steve? Steve, listen, Steve. What the hell was Brian grieving, Steve? Seriously, Steve, can we get an answer? What could Brian possibly be grieving here? Oh, I don't know, bitch. Maybe the death of his fiancée, Gabbie, by his own hands? Like, that would certainly be something to grieve. I'm sorry, y'all, but like, listen, like, we have to remember that at this point, when Brian was grieving, no one knew where Gabbie was. Like, well, almost no one, if Brian allegedly was involved. But no one knew that Gabbie had been killed at this point. She was just missing. But you mean to tell me that now, more than a month later, it comes out that Brian left very upset, that he was grieving, and his father wanted to stop him from leaving but couldn't? Like, why was this information not shared before, Steve? Steve, I'm waiting, Steve. I'm waiting. You know what, let's just hear it again, shall we?
Chris and Roberta knew that their son Brian was grieving. They knew he was so upset.
All right, listen, and here comes some SWOOP speculation again, so alert. Here's what I personally think happened. We know that Brian came back in Gabbie's van without Gabbie. He illegally stole money out of Gabbie's account, likely after she was killed. He hitchhiked, drove cross-country, created a playlist called Self-Consumption, and when he got home on September 1st, he was witnessed doing like regular-ass things like mowing the lawn, walking around with his parents, and went camping with them, taking smiley photos. I think Brian was likely either in shock or denial, or thinking that he got away with it for a while because no one had reported Gabbie missing yet, which was why he could even smile in those camping photos with his family. Again, this is all because I believe that he is the one who killed her, allegedly. But then once the Petitos start calling and there's police coming around and the public catches wind, now he's and it starts to sink in that he might get caught, and he either panics or the grief starts to sink in. And what's worse is because Brian's parents also ghost Gabbie's family and lawyer up and refuse to talk and then remark on their son's grieving, I absolutely think Brian probably told his parents what happened, and they knew Gabbie was dead on or before September 10th when they first ghosted her parents. And again, this is all just speculation, and there's a chance somehow, though it would be like mind-boggling to me, that the Laundries are totally innocent of involvement, but I find that highly unlikely personally. And I don't know, let me know, but I think their attorney absolutely also knew what happened to Gabbie at this time. I mean, like, listen to his response when he's point blank asked if Brian killed Gabbie.
I do have to ask, did Brian kill Gabbie?
You know, that's it's a tough question to answer, other than no. To my knowledge, you know, I can't say that he did or didn't. I'm sure the FBI may be able to fill those answers in at a different time.
That's a tough question to answer. No, it isn't. If you know, then it's like a yes or a no. But of course, you know, he's the attorney, so he's not going to answer, and legally he shouldn't, and we need to respect that. But I find his answer so fascinating, primarily because he sort of hesitates and like stumbles around in his words a bit here, which he normally never does. Actually, in another interview later, Bertolino is questioned by Ashley Banfield about using the word grieving, and his response is something else.
I have heard you say on other interviews just in the last 24 hours that he was grieving. And anyone who is grieving is sad over death. Was he sad over the death of Gabby Petito when he was grieving prior to going out on his hike, from which he did not return?
And Ashley, as I've said, you know, all day long, because I know I've been getting heat on the use of that word, yesterday was a very long day. The day before that was a long day. One of the last interviews I gave of the evening, which was a last minute thing, I used the word grieving, which I had been using all day long with respect to Chris and Roberta and the news of the death of their son. I clarified that. I said he was upset, he was distressed. Chris described him to me as he was leaving. And this was several weeks later when Chris and I were talking about it. He said, Steve, you know, he was upset, he was distressed. I knew I shouldn't let him walk out the door, but I couldn't stop him. You know, I used the term grieving. It was probably a poor choice of words. You know, grieving was, you know, used by myself multiple times yesterday with respect to Chris and Roberta. and it was a poor choice of words to be using for Brian.
I'm sorry, y'all, and like, you're welcome to disagree with me, but I'm calling bullshit on this. Like, literally the only time we've heard the attorney use the word grieving was in reference to death. The only times.
You know, Roberta Laundrie's demeanor and disposition over the last 4 or 5 weeks, I can tell you she's been very upset. She's, again, been distraught, and in the last couple of days, she's grieving.
That is the only way he has ever used that word. And if he meant Brian was just sad over like Gabby missing, then why didn't he ever clarify and say that? Never once did he say, oh no, I didn't mean grieving, I just meant Brian's sad because Gabby was missing. Like, he never says that. I think the word grieving was a slip of the tongue. And I think that's exactly what Brian was doing. Grieving over allegedly killing Gabby and that he might get caught.
He is, in your, as you said, mistaken characterization, grieving. I mean, that tells me that he is apoplectically sad. As you mischaracterized it as grieving, it is at the very least horrifically sad. And he walks out my door and doesn't come home. I do not forget that date.
Can I just give a quick shout out to your girl, Ashley Banfield, for pulling out the Oxford dictionary on this interview.
Tells me that he is apoplectically sad.
Like, what in the Cinnamon Toast Crunch bran muffin with a side of orange juice? Apoplectically? Bitch. Okay, a bitch had to look this one up, okay? Who uses the word apoplectically? Your girl's on that brain shit, like next level shit. Let me take a lesson and find out, honey. I am here for it. Apoplectically. But jokes aside, like, this is the lawyer assigned to speak for the family to ensure that anything said to the press and public is carefully analyzed for content that could affect crimes, charges, lawsuits, public opinions, etc. And the word grieving is not subtle, like not by a long shot.
Tells me that he is apoplectically sad.
Grieving implies sorrow over a death. It's not heartbreak, it's not upset, it's not depressed, it's sorrow regarding death. You know, typically the most logical, obvious explanation is often the true one. And Brian and his parents refused to talk to Gabby's family when they called September 10th. Why? Then they retained an attorney the next day, September 11th. Why? And continued to ghost Gabby's family and law enforcement after a missing persons report was filed on Gabby that day. Why? And the attorney spoke with Brian and the family September 12th and 13th. Why? Brian was so upset that the parents tried to get him not to leave. Why? Could it be because Brian and his family knew by September 10th at the latest that Gabby was dead? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Because I think if Brian were simply like super sad that Gabby was missing, then why the hell did he refuse to help search for her? And they all refused to cooperate with police and instead lawyered up. And I'd just like to point out that Chris and Roberta Laundrie know their son is grieving, know he left for a hike and didn't come back, went and took his car back from the preserve, the literal scene where Brian's remains were discovered, and still do not tell law enforcement at the time. Just throwing that out there, just bank shotting that out there, okay? There it is.
Apoplectically sad.
Okay, so I want to really dig into some research I've done that specifically focuses on Brian Laundrie's movements and his parents' potential involvement. And to do that, I'm gonna have to move a bit non-linear in the timeline, as like a lot of new information has been coming kind of out of order, if that makes sense. So real quick, I'll just bullet point some of the most important dates from the last doc, and if you want more in-depth details, again, just watch that one. But just to refresh, okay, so on September 1st, Brian returns home to Florida in Gabby's van without Gabby. On September 3rd, his mother makes a new camping reservation for 3 people, and on September 6th through the 8th, Brian, his dad Chris, and his mom went camping. On Friday, September 10th, Gabby's family texted Brian as they were concerned about Gabby, and as we all know, the Laundries completely ignored them, and it's something that still pisses me off to no end with how absolutely cruel that was. But it also makes me highly suspicious that perhaps Brian's parents knew at this point that Gabbie was dead, because on September 11th, the next day, them hoes lawyer up. Bitch, when I tell you this shit is about to go off the rails, honey, just wait. Oh, and we also now know that there were not one, but 2 911 calls placed to the Laundrie's home on September 10th. The second call involving Gabbie's father, Joseph Petito, although he was not actually at the Laundrie's home.
It brings the things to light because, you know, we've been looking for Gabbie for how long, and they've known that Brian's been there since the first. So if she was, I mean, that was a very nice, well-written statement, you know, so, but it does explain if that's that family's version of love, to just ignore and not care that someone's gone and people are looking for them and the entire country's looking for them. I mean, that explains how we got to where we are today. Because, I mean, look at their version of what they call love. Now, on Saturday, September 11th, Gabbie's family filed a missing persons report on Gabbie, and on that very same day, wouldn't you know, Laundrie's lawyer up. That's the natural response.
When did you become involved with the Laundrie family as their attorney pertaining to this particular case?
I would say that was on September 11th.
Now, in a very recent interview, their family attorney said that he last spoke to Brian and the family on September 12th and the 13th. And the family tells law enforcement that the last time they saw Brian was on the 14th, which is false.
At any point in the last 5 weeks, have you spoken with Brian Laundrie?
Yes, I spoke to Brian Laundrie on September 12th and September 13th.
Okay, so here's where the shit is about to hit the fan and spread the stink like all over the Laundrie's timeline. And we're going to jump around because, honey, it's a lot. Like a lot. Like making the movie Cats. Bitch, it don't make no damn sense, okay? Now, on Friday, September 17th, the Laundries file a missing persons report for Brian, saying that Brian left on Tuesday, September 14th to go on a hike in the Carlton Reserve, and that was the last time they saw Brian alive. They said that they went to look for Brian the next day, the 15th, found his car, his Mustang, there with a note on it that it was parked illegally and had to be moved, and then went home because they wanted to leave Brian's car for him to come home in because, you know, he's supposed to be out there hiking. But then on Thursday, the 16th, they said they went back and retrieved Brian's car and drove it home, and then the next day reported Brian missing. Now, when all this information was made public, a reporter actually pointed out a huge flaw in the Laundrie's story, that in fact, Brian's Mustang was seen in front of the Laundrie's home on Wednesday, the 15th, meaning that the Laundries had to have driven Brian's car back on or before the 15th and not the 16th like they originally reported, which of course that means they bring the car back and they don't report him missing the next day, which would be more reasonable. They wait a couple of days. So then it comes out that nah, bitch, like Brian actually left on Monday, the 13th, an entire day earlier, not the 14th like originally reported.
And Laundrie's parents have changed their story about when they last saw Brian. They've been saying it was September 14th when they were last with him. Now, after 2 weeks, they say it was really the 13th. It was all just a mix-up with the FBI.
We reached out to the Laundrie family attorney asking how Brian's parents didn't realize the mistake for 2 weeks. The response we got from the lawyer? No further comment.
And this has literally just been clarified in recent interviews with their attorney weeks later after they were essentially caught. But even then, Bertolino still makes it super confusing.
And I want to talk a little bit about the timing of all of it, because the press sort of, you know, felt a little yanked around, as did the police, with the timing of when, you know, Brian went on his hike. Originally it was Tuesday the 14th, and then late into this whole ordeal, it became Monday. I heard you speak on Chris Cuomo's program the other day, suggesting that you, in fact, were the person to call the FBI and notify them the next day after he didn't return, which would be Tuesday, correct?
So it is correct that I notified the FBI, and, you know, you'll have to forgive me because the days were blending together, and, you know, I spoke to the FBI just today on that issue again.
First of all, I have to say how incredibly suspicious all of this looks to me. Like, Steve Bertolino has been sharp as hell on nearly every question he's given.
Let me tell you something else, Ashley, before you interrupt me again. I did not call anybody on Friday.
And he's almost like over detailed in his answers. And if you ask him a question, like boom, he'll not only give you the answer, he'll give you like the date, the timestamp, who was in the room, their zodiac sign, what they had for breakfast, and if they take sugar in their coffee, like all the details. You know what I mean?
Friday evening, somewhere around 4:45, I received a call from the FBI. It came up on the screen in my truck. I told my daughter she needed to leave the truck.
But for some reason, when asked about this one specific timeline, just a couple of dates, that the Laundries were caught either lying about or getting wrong, Bertolino stalls. He hesitates, and it's just super unclear about it all.
So, it is correct that I notified the FBI, and you'll have to forgive me because the days were blending together, and
like, y'all see how detailed and clear Bertolino is on every thing except the events of the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th. Like, this bitch really gave us the exact timestamp of when the FBI called on Friday, that the call came in on his truck display, and that he asked his daughter to leave. Like, all of this overabundance of details.
Friday evening, somewhere around 4:45, I received a call from the FBI. It came up on the screen in my truck. I told my daughter she needed to leave the truck.
But this bitch can't remember 3 full-ass days the Laundries were at the literal location where their son was later found dead? Like, really? The days just blur together, but like only those dates?
So, it is correct that I notified the FBI, and you'll have to forgive me because the days were blending together, and I spoke to the FBI just today on that issue again.
Bitch, listen, I am telling y'all. Whew. So Bertolino is saying he spoke to Brian on the 12th and then Monday the 13th. And also on the 13th, Brian left for a hike, and that night, Brian's father, Chris, went out to the reserve to look for him, but it was too dark and rainy to see anything. Then both parents went there on the 14th, found the car and the parking notice, left the car, and then came back the next day, the 15th, and drove Brian's Mustang home. That's the new timeline that's been given.
We then received some information from press that indicated that they had video of the car in the driveway on Wednesday. And when we went through the period and I showed them the video clip of the Mustang on I believe it was the 15th in the driveway, Chris said to me, well, then it had to be Monday.
They waited and didn't report him missing until 2 crucial days later on the 17th. And not only that, they didn't actually initiate the call to the FBI. The FBI called their attorney, which for some reason he needed to make very clear.
Let me be perfectly clear, unequivocally. I received a call from the FBI. I did not call them.
Anyways, my first question is, if the FBI had not called, were the Laundries ever going to report Brian missing? Like, it seems like they were just trying to drag this out as long as possible. I mean, they already fudged the timeline, and in my opinion, were lying about that. Just like Ashley said here.
But we do understand that the days were blending together. So as I said—
But this is my problem, that the days blending together, and I only interrupt because I'm a mother of boys, and if my son had unexpectedly come home from a trip without his fiance, stopped talking, refused to speak to police, she's reported missing. He is, in your, as you said, mistaken characterization, grieving. I mean, that tells me that he is apoplectically sad. As you mischaracterized it as grieving, it is at the very least horrifically sad, and he walks out my door and doesn't come home. I do not forget that date.
Okay, swoop speculation. I feel like these couple of dates, the 14th and the 15th, are some of the most crucial to the case, namely because I think there's a high likelihood that Brian met his demise around this time. Again, I could be wrong, just speculation. Or Brian's parents helped him escape, and that these will be the most crucial dates in whether or not the Laundries get charged with conspiracy after the fact or other charges like tampering with evidence. I mean, look, like, the Laundries literally went to the very scene where Brian's remains were found a month later, and they removed his car from the scene, which, number one, if you think your son is off on a hike, like, why would you take his car from him when you claim he left his phone at home, so he supposedly doesn't have a phone and now doesn't have a car, and you expect him to just get home? And now, because Brian is no longer alive, he can never legally be held accountable for his possible role in Gabby's death because he cannot be tried posthumously for anything.
He can no longer be tried for anything, even posthumously. So there's zero exposure other than legacy for Brian Laundrie. For that reason, how long will it be until you can actually tell us these things?
You know, as I said, you know, there are some unanswered questions. There are some issues that need to be resolved. You know, there are, you know, charges out there still in Wyoming. There are certain things that I even discussed with the FBI today with respect to Chris and Roberta that still have to be resolved. There's been a lot of accusations. There's been a lot of finger pointing.
So to me, speculation, Brian's parents look like they're distancing themselves from Brian's movements because they are now the only remaining members of that family who could be charged with anything. And I'm willing to bet at the very least, if it's legally possible, even though Brian is not alive, and I know that complicates things, I'm willing to believe there's a wrongful death suit right around the corner with the Laundrie's name on it. We will see. And I don't know why, but for some reason, Bertolino also discloses something that I think was a big mistake and a red flag. In the Ashley Banfield interview, he says that during this mixed up time period before the parents finally file a missing persons report, the attorney had to consult with someone for ethical advice.
I'll disclose this. I reached out to somebody in the afternoon and I got an ethical opinion as an attorney for Brian Laundrie as a missing person, perhaps. What could I do? Once I received that ethical advice, if you will, decisions were made between me and Chris and Roberta.
If you're in a position where Brian was grieving, your words, he disappears, Gabby is missing, and you haven't reported Brian missing, and you're having an ethical dilemma that you need advice for, like, bitch, what's good, Steve? What's good? Like, what's going on, honey? Like, why the ethical problems? Steve, honey, we'd like to know.
Let me be perfectly clear. Unequivocally, I received a call from the FBI. I did not call them.
Like, just like emphatically declaring that y'all didn't go to the FBI to report Brian missing, the FBI had to come to you. I don't think it's the flex that you think it is. But you know, what do I know? Look, just to summarize my own thoughts and leave a comment, like, let me know if you disagree, if you agree, or what you think, because again, it's all speculation at this point as we wait to see if any new evidence comes in. I think in regards to Brian's parents, I think these two dates, September 14th and the 15th, the only dates the parents and the attorney have lied about, that just so happen to be the only two dates that the parents were alone at the scene where Brian was later found, his remains were found, are going to be very crucial dates. Like, what happened when they were out there alone? Why did they go back several times? Why did they remove Brian's car? Why didn't they contact police? Why did they mess up the timeline? Honestly, I think the Laundries are scared shitless about those two dates in particular. And now when they finally did join the search a month later at the scene, how were they the ones to immediately find the evidence where the remains were? Like, it's all just a coincidence? Or like, is something more sinister going on? And again, like, I know this is all swoop speculation and maybe even a little bit of conspiracy theory like right now, so just take this with a grain of salt, and honestly I hope this isn't the case, but bear with me while my brain just kind of explores options here that I've been thinking about. I do think, as much as I hate to say this, I do think it's also quite possible that Brian's parents, when they went looking for Brian alone in the reserve after he didn't come home from his hike, you know, them knowing his favorite place to go hike there, I think there's a possibility that Brian's parents could have found Brian's body. Again, this is just pure speculation, that's why I'm putting it at the very end of the video, and like, it's not backed by any current facts. But when I think about what are the most likely scenarios here, I think it's quite likely that Brian took his own life. And remember, like, he was grieving and unbelievably sad. And murder-suicide in DV cases, while it's uncommon, it's not rare statistically. And Gabbie was now a missing person. Like, this was starting to get national attention, and the police and the press were closing in. Like, he was caught. And when someone is that distraught over what they've possibly done, I think it's very likely that he left the house very emotional with nothing more than a backpack and a dry bag, and may have even taken his life that night. And if that's potentially the case, I think it would be unlikely that he would have walked out in the middle of the swamp to do it, where his body would be hard to find. You know what I mean? Like, that's just not, it's not a common thing in that scenario. And of course, I could be wrong about all of this, and he could have been attacked by wildlife, or his remains were moved around by animals. But if it was taking his own life, I think he would have probably done it in an accessible location. And if I was like really letting my brain just play out possible scenarios, his parents could have discovered it when they were looking out there those 2 days that they were alone, and removed his car from the scene. And I certainly hope that that's not the case. That would be horrendous for his parents to go through, discovering him like that, and I hope that I'm wrong. But if they did find Brian not alive, then there could also be the possibility that his remains were moved to a more private location, like the flooded swamp. I mean, they did insist several times that that was the only place that Brian could be. And in the end, they were exactly right. Or, you know, another option, they could have found some of his items, like without Brian, and possibly relocated the items to somewhere harder to find. Like, and if there was a weapon found, that could have been moved as well. Like, if they knew that Gabbie was already gone and knew or suspected Brian was gone, then they could have been trying to preserve what little legacy Brian had left in this situation. And if we're being real, I would think as parents, maybe that's sort of understandable in such a dire situation, not to excuse it, but ultimately I don't know. And to be fair, Brian's parents might be completely innocent of any knowledge of what Brian did or didn't do. And while their silence is alarming, they are legally allowed. It is their right, and we do have to allow that for them, and they are at least in part victims as well, because they did lose their child. And like, bottom line, we don't know what happened, and the truth is we may never know what happened, which is really sad no matter how you look at it. Like, 2 people's lives have ended and families have been destroyed. It's a shitty, terrible situation from all angles, with absolutely no winners here. Again, if you have any information regarding this case, please do contact the FBI. Now again, like, please excuse the shift in tone for a moment, because I need to say a couple of things at the end of all of my docs, but thank you for continuing to watch and support these. It really means so much to me, and I hope we can continue to be a community where we support victims and survivors. Couple of Twitter shout outs from my Shane Dawson doc. First one goes to Alice, who said, "Bless your girl for watching the SD video so I didn't have to, and for reminding the world why racism, bigotry, and illegal predatory behavior are not mistakes to be so quickly forgotten. Also for pointing out the culpability of you know who." And the second shout out goes to Micah Spooky Forest, who said, "I'd love how this video discusses how the powerful run what is acceptable in the platform. This really reminds me of Foucault's rhetorical theory and the power structures presented by society's most privileged." I see y'all. Okay, I see y'all flexing those brain waves. I am here for it, honey. If you want to be my next shout out, just follow me on Twitter at SpankyB and retweet this video right here, and follow me on Instagram, linked below, and get ready because Petty University merch is officially coming in early November, people. It all looks incredible. I am finishing the photos and shop design now, and we will be launching very soon, so be on the lookout in the upcoming docs. Huge thank you again to today's sponsors, HelloFresh. Be sure to check out HelloFresh at HelloFresh.com and use code SWOOP14 to get 14 free meals across 5 HelloFresh boxes, plus free shipping and Surfshark VPN. Be sure to check out Surfshark with my link in the description and use code SWOOP to get an 83% off discount and 3 months free to enjoy all your new movies and shows to binge. And again, I'm so grateful to have sponsors from which I will be making a donation, and thank thank you all for checking out the sponsors week after week. Your support of the docs and the sponsors is what encourages them to keep sponsoring in the first place and what makes these docs even possible, which take a ton of time, and I am forever grateful to you all. I want to again send my deepest condolences to Gabby's family. I can't possibly imagine what they have been going through, and all I can do is hope that in time they are able to find some peace through all this pain and that her memory will always be a blessing. And my condolences to Brian's family as well. Like, regardless of what I think of their behavior, at the end of the day, they didn't start this, they didn't ask for this going in, and they also lost their child. Like, again, no one wins here. You know, now that Brian has been found, I hope that some of this energy can shift to help other victims who desperately need their story and their voice heard. It's, again, something that I want to do more of moving forward, and I'm gonna figure out how I can do that, and I hope that you will join me as well. And I want to reiterate again for anyone watching, if you have ever been the victim of abuse or DV, you have options, there are resources, it is not your fault, and you are never alone. Please reach out to someone you trust for help. You do not have to go through it alone, and you deserve to feel safe and to find happiness and peace. Please take care of each other, and I will see you in a few days with a new doc. Bye.